What would you do if you gave someone your trust, your money, your dreams, and then discovered that it was all a lie? Would you still believe in love, or would you close your heart forever? My name is Elena, and this is my story of how one wrong decision changed my life. I was 27 years old when it all began. I lived in Barcelona, not far from the sea, in a small rented room above a busy street. My life was simple and often tiring. I worked as a waitress in a small restaurant near the old city. The place was noisy, full of tourists, and I spent most of my days carrying plates, cleaning tables, and smiling at strangers. My pay was low, but I saved every coin I could because I dreamed of studying Wenzhou and opening a little cafe of my own. I wanted something better, something that belonged to me. Before I continue, I would love to know something. Where are you listening from? Which city? Which country? Please share it in the comments. One Saturday morning, my friend convinced me to help at a volunteer event in the city square. It was a charity event for children who needed school books. I had little free time. But I went anyway. I thought it would feel good to give something back. That day, while arranging tables with donated books, I saw him. His name was Marco. He was 32, tall, with dark eyes that seemed kind, and a voice that was calm and gentle. He was helping too, handing out boxes of pencils to children. When he looked at me and smiled, I felt noticed in a way I had not felt for a long time. We began to talk while we worked. He told me he was new in Barcelona, working for a small company, and trying to build his life again after some difficult years. I told him about my job in the restaurant, my small room, and my dream of one day studying more. He listened closely. His eyes stayed on me as if my words mattered. That was something rare for me. At the end of the event, he asked if we could have coffee together. I agreed, even though my hands were still full of dust from carrying boxes. We met at a little cafe near the square. He talked about books he loved, about music, and about traveling. He spoke slowly, carefully, as if every detail was important. I laughed more in that 1 hour than I had in months. I walked back to my room with light steps, thinking about his smile. Soon we began to see each other often. He came to the restaurant sometimes, waiting for me after work. We walked through the narrow streets, we watched the sunset by the beach, and we sat on old benches in the park, talking about everything and nothing. I started to feel that maybe life could change. Maybe I had finally met someone who saw me for who I was. Weeks turned into months, and my feelings for Marco grew. He was gentle, patient, and always kind in his words. He told me he liked the way I smiled even when I was tired. He said I was strong because I worked hard and still had dreams. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to believe in someone. I believed in him. I believed in us. Then, one evening, he looked troubled. We were sitting near the beach, listening to the waves. He stayed quiet for a long time before he finally spoke. He told me he was sick. He explained that he needed special treatment in a private clinic, but the cost was more than he could manage. His company insurance did not cover it. He said he had been hiding it because he did not want to worry me. His voice was low, and he looked away as if ashamed. I felt my chest tighten. I asked how much it would be. He told me the amount, and my heart sank. It was more than I had ever seen at one time, but it was not impossible. It was almost the same as the money I had saved over many years for my dream cafe. That night, I could not sleep. I thought of my savings, the envelope hidden under clothes in my small cupboard. I thought of the hours I worked, the days I spent carrying heavy trays, the nights I went home with aching feet. And then I thought of Marco, the man who looked at me with such gentle eyes, the man who made me laugh again. If I lost him, what would my dream mean? By morning, I had made my decision. I told him I would help. His eyes filled with tears when I said it. He kissed my hand and whispered that he would never forget this. In that moment, I believed I was doing the right thing. The next days moved quickly. We went together to the clinic, and I paid most of the cost in advance. The rest he promised to manage with his own salary. I watched him sign the forms, and I felt proud. Proud that I was able to help him. Proud that my hard work gave him a chance. He squeezed my hand and called me his angel. I thought love was meant to feel like this, full of sacrifice and trust. I told myself I would find a way to save again. And maybe my dream of a cafe could wait, but his life could not. For a while, everything seemed fine. He went to his appointments, he said he felt stronger, and he thanked me every day. We still met often, though I noticed small changes. He was sometimes tired, sometimes distracted, and he often checked his phone in the middle of our walks. I told myself it was because he was worried about work or about his health. I tried not to think too much about it. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe in us. But slowly, he began to see me less. First, he said he had long hours at work. Then, he said he needed to rest after treatment. The messages became shorter. The calls came less often. Weeks passed, and the space between us grew wider. I felt the cold in his voice, even when he tried to sound warm. I tried to tell myself it was only stress, that love could survive busy days and silence. But deep inside, I felt something breaking. Then, one evening after work, I decided to surprise him. I went to the address he had once given me. I walked up the stairs with a smile ready on my face, but when I knocked on the door, there was no answer. The flat looked dark. I waited, then knocked again, but nobody came. Finally, a neighbor opened his own door and asked if I was looking for Marco. I nodded. He told me that Marco had moved out a week before. I stood there, frozen. My heart dropped. I walked back home with heavy steps, my chest full of fear and confusion. Why had he left? Where had he gone? That night, I cried alone in my little room. I looked at the empty cupboard where my savings had been. I remembered his words, his promises, his soft eyes. I asked myself again and again what I had done wrong. Had I pushed too much? Had I not been enough? The questions circled in my head, but no answers came. It was only days later that I finally heard the truth. And when I did, it broke me in a way I had never known before. The days after Marco disappeared were some of the darkest in my life. I went to work at the restaurant each day, but I moved like a shadow. The plates felt heavier in my hands, the voices of the customers sounded distant, and I often forgot to smile. My boss asked me if I was sick, but I shook my head. I could not tell anyone. How could I explain that the man I loved, the man I had trusted with everything, was gone without a word? My savings were gone too, and with them my dreams. It felt as if he had taken my future when he left. I tried calling him many times. At first his phone rang, but no one answered. Then, after a few days, the number was no longer active. Each time I saw the word failed on my phone screen, my chest hurt more. I checked my messages every morning and every night, but no reply ever came. I walked past the places where we used to meet, hoping to see him by chance, but he was never there. The city felt too big, too empty without him. One evening, after closing at the restaurant, I sat on the stone steps outside the building, tired and cold. The street lamps glowed softly, and the sound of voices and music floated from nearby bars. I wanted to go home, but my feet would not move. Then I heard someone call my name. When I turned, I saw a man I had met only once before. His name was Luis. He worked in the same office as Marco. I remembered seeing him quickly one afternoon when Marco introduced me to a few colleagues. He had seemed friendly, with kind brown eyes and a calm smile. "Elena," he said softly as he walked closer, "I need to talk to you." His face was serious, and I felt fear rise in my chest. I asked if he knew where Marco was. Luis sighed and sat next to me on the steps. For a moment he stayed silent, looking down at the street. Then he said words that broke me. "Marco is not who you think he is." I felt my stomach twist. I asked what he meant, but he continued before I could say more. He told me that Marco had left the office suddenly, without saying goodbye. He explained that Marco had been living two lives. One life was the one he showed me, the kind man, the volunteer, the dreamer. The other life was full of lies. Luis told me Marco had used people before. I was not the first. He had borrowed money from others, told stories about sickness, and then disappeared when he had enough. Luis said he felt guilty because he had suspected it before, but never warned me. He thought maybe Marco had changed, but he had not. As his words sank in, I felt the world spin around me. My hands shook, and I held my knees tightly to stop the trembling. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. I asked Luis why Marco would do this. Luis looked at me with pity. "Because you cared," he said. "Because you were kind." And he knew how to use that. I walked home that night in silence, my heart heavy with truth. The streets of Barcelona, once full of light and color, now looked cold and cruel. I unlocked the door to my small room, sat on my bed, and cried until no tears were left. The cupboard where my savings had been felt like a wound in the room, an open space that reminded me of everything I had lost. It was not only money, it was trust, faith, and the dream of a life with someone who loved me. The following weeks were filled with sadness. I went to work, but every free hour I stayed inside, unable to face the city that held his memory. My friends tried to call me, but I ignored most of their messages. I felt ashamed. I had been blind. I had believed in him so easily. At night, I replayed every moment in my head, wondering if there had been signs. His sudden silences, his distracted looks, his phone calls he never explained. They were all there, but I had chosen not to see them. Love had covered my eyes, and now that cover was gone, leaving only pain. One afternoon, while wiping tables, I overheard two women talking about betrayal. They were laughing, saying how foolish someone must be to give all their savings for love. I felt my face burn, and I had to leave the room. Their words cut into me, even though they did not know my story. I realized then that silence was making me weaker. Keeping everything inside was like carrying a stone that grew heavier each day. I needed to let it out, not for revenge, but to breathe again. That night, I opened my old notebook. I began to write everything, from the day I met Marco at the volunteer event to the day Luis told me the truth. The words poured out of me like water breaking through a dam. My hand ached, but I did not stop. When I finished, I looked at the pages, full of my pain and my truth. I thought about keeping them hidden, but something inside me said no. People needed to know. I could not be the only one who had been fooled by someone like him. So I typed my story on my small laptop and shared it on a local blog that often published personal experiences. I used only my first name. I did not know if anyone would read it, but I pressed send anyway. I felt both afraid and free. To my surprise, the response came quickly. Within days, messages appeared. Strangers wrote to me, saying they understood. Some had been through similar stories. Others thanked me for being brave. One woman said, "You gave me courage to leave a man who is lying to me." Another said, "Your pain shows me I am not alone." I read every word, and each message felt like a small piece of healing. My story spread further than I ever imagined. It reached social pages, then newspapers, and soon people in the city were talking about it. I was no longer invisible. My pain had a voice, and that voice was heard. But fame did not heal me completely. Each morning I still woke up with an empty space beside me. Each night I still touched the scar of my loss when I looked at the cupboard with no savings. Healing is slow, and I understood that now. Still, I had taken a first step. I had turned my silence into truth. Then one evening, while closing the restaurant, a woman walked in. She was elegant, dressed in a white coat, with eyes that looked both strong and tired. She asked me if I was Elena. When I nodded, she said, "I need to talk to you." "It is about Marco." My heart raced again, but I agreed to sit with her. We chose a quiet table in the corner, and she began to speak. Her words would show me another side of Marco, one I had not known before, and they would change how I saw everything. The woman sitting across from me looked older than me, perhaps in her early 30s. She held her hands tightly together as if she was afraid they would shake. I watched her carefully, wondering what new truth she carried. For a moment, she said nothing, only looked at me with sad eyes. Then she spoke. "My name is Clara," she said softly. "I knew Marco too. I was with him for almost a year." Her words hit me like a stone. I felt the air leave my chest. My heart began to race as my mind tried to understand. Clara continued before I could say anything. "I only discovered your story online last week. When I read it, I knew I had to find you, because I was part of his other life. I wanted to run from the table. My legs felt heavy, but my whole body shook." Clara's voice was calm but filled with pain. She explained how Marco had promised her the same things he had promised me. He told her he wanted a future, that she was his only love, that he dreamed of a life with her. He had borrowed money from her too, saying he needed it for business. She gave him everything she could. Then one day, he vanished from her life, just as he had vanished from mine. When she discovered my story online, she realized that Marco had been living with two women at the same time. He had used us both. We were both his victims. She said she felt ashamed at first, but then she decided that silence would only protect him. She wanted me to know the whole truth. As I listened, my hands turned cold. I stared at the table because I could not look at her face. Part of me felt angry at her, though I knew it was not her fault. Another part of me felt strange comfort, knowing that I was not alone. He had fooled her too. It was not only me. Still, the betrayal burned like fire inside my chest. When Clara finished, she touched my hand lightly. "I am sorry, Elena," she whispered. "I wanted you to know. You deserved honesty." Then she stood and left, leaving me alone in the quiet restaurant. I sat there for a long time after she was gone, staring at the empty chair. The truth was heavier now, but it was complete. Marco had not only taken my savings, he had stolen my trust, my dreams, and even the belief that love could be real. That night I walked home slowly through the streets of Barcelona. The lights of the city glowed, but to me they felt distant. My room felt colder than before. I lay on my bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything. I thought about the first day I saw him at the volunteer event. The way his smile made me feel special, the nights by the beach, the promises he whispered. All of it was false. Every memory was poisoned now. For days after Clara's visit, I moved through life like a ghost. Work felt empty, food tasted like nothing, and I avoided people as much as possible. I felt that I had no strength left. Sometimes I looked at the small scar on my hand, where I once burned myself at the restaurant, and I thought of scars that no one could see. The ones inside me, they were deeper and they hurt more. But as weeks passed, something began to change. The more I read the messages from strangers who had read my story, the more I felt less alone. Some people told me they had gone through the same pain. Others told me I was strong. One young girl wrote, "Thank you, Elena. Because of your story, I know I must not give my heart too quickly." I realized then that my suffering had become more than my own. It had become a warning, a voice for others who could still be saved. Slowly, I started to rebuild myself. I decided not to wait for Marco's shadow to leave. I would create light for myself. I began to study again in the evenings, taking online classes with the little money I still had left. My dream of opening a cafe was far away, but not impossible. Each lesson gave me new energy. Each page I read made me feel that I was taking back what he had stolen. Months later, while helping at another volunteer event, I met someone new. His name was Javier. He was not like Marco. He did not make big promises or speak in sweet words. He asked simple questions about my life, and he listened carefully. He told me about his own struggles, about losing his job once and starting again. His honesty felt strange at first, almost uncomfortable, because I was used to lies, but in his plain words, I found something I had forgotten: peace. We began to meet sometimes after the events, drinking coffee in small cafes or walking through quiet streets. He never pushed me to trust him. He never asked for more than I could give. He respected my silence when I did not want to speak. Slowly, I began to feel safe in his presence. It was not magic, not like the false dream Marco had given me. It was simple, calm, and real. One evening, as we sat by the sea, Javier said something that stayed with me. "Pain leaves scars, Elena, but scars are not shame. They are proof that we survived." I looked at him, and for the first time in many months, I smiled without forcing it. He was right. My scar was my survival. Years have passed since the day Marco disappeared. Sometimes I still think of him, but the memory no longer cuts like before. Instead, it reminds me of the woman I used to be, the mistakes I made, and the strength I discovered. I know now that love is not about grand words or expensive promises. Love is respect, patience, and truth. Today, I still work hard. My savings are small again, but they are mine. My dream of a cafe is alive, waiting for its time. And when I look at the people around me, I no longer see the world as cruel. I see a place where pain and healing live side by side, where we can lose everything but still rise again. What would you do if someone you loved betrayed you, not only with lies but with your own kindness? Would you break or would you stand again? I broke once, but now I stand. And this is the price of my wrong decision. I lost money, trust, and time. But I gained something greater. I gained the knowledge that even in betrayal, I can rise, I can heal, and I can still believe in love, the kind of love that does not take but gives, the kind of love that finally feels like home. If my story touched you, please like, comment, and subscribe for more. Your words may help someone else feel less alone.